Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at something completely different, something called Dracula flow. It's definitely intense.
All right.
So just a heads up there. We'll be working from transcripts of 2 YouTube videos from Plum Corp Records, Dracula Flow, the official saga, parts 1 through 4, that's one video, and then Dracula Flow 5. And yeah, the language is very strong.
Okay.
Even shocking in places.
Yeah.
But stick with us.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to unpack here about the creator and, the world we live in. So
Yeah, it's really fascinating how this kind of content really pushes the boundaries and gets a reaction from people,
Right.
It reminds me of other musical genres that have used like really exaggerated personas and storytelling to kind of make a statement.
Yeah.
Like if you think back to early gangster rap or even heavy metal.
Yeah, when I first read through these lyrics, it was like this crazy whirlwind of over-the-top violence and bragging about wealth and drugs.
Yeah.
Just to give you the taste. And in listener, be warned, it's intense.
Yeah.
There's a line where the creator says, "We straight gassing, cutting straight to the bricks. This ain't nothing to me, man.
Yeah.
We smoking runs. Shorty got a BBL. Took that out because she couldn't run. I had to do it to them."
Wow. Yeah, that definitely falls into what we call like shock rap or horrorcore.
Yeah.
These genres, they're known for using extreme imagery and dark humor to challenge norms.
Right.
And really provoke the audience. What's interesting is this isn't really a new thing. If you look back at the history of music, you see these same patterns of artists using these larger-than-life personas and imagery to make a point.
Right.
I mean, think about how gangster rap in the 80s and 90s used violent narratives to talk about the realities of, like, marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Or how heavy metal uses dark themes and intense music to explore taboo subjects.
Yeah, it's like they're playing a character.
Yeah.
Right. But then beneath the surface of this Dracula Flow persona, there are these themes that hint at something more going on.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's more than just shock for the sake of shock. One thing that really stood out to me was this obsession with luxury brands.
Yeah.
They name drop Chanel, Rick Owens, Chrome Hearts.
Yeah.
It's a classic theme in hip-hop, this desire for status and upward mobility. But it makes you think about how consumerism and identity are so intertwined in our culture.
Right. And then there's the constant references to drugs, especially prescription painkillers like Percocet. Makes me wonder if this is reflecting a bigger cultural issue, maybe even like a commentary on the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It could be reflecting a culture of self-medication escapism, maybe even a cry for help.
Right.
We really have to consider the context where this content is coming from.
And what about the violence? There's a lot of it tied to ops, and here ops is slang for like rivals or enemies. To the back of a track hawk, blew up their entire quadrant.
Wow.
Is this all just for shock value, or is there something more?
It's a great question. It could just be hyperbole, trying to create a certain image. But we also have to consider the possibility that it reflects real experiences.
Yeah.
A reality where violence is commonplace. It's hard to say without knowing more about the creator and their background.
So we've got this extreme persona rapping about violence, drugs, luxury brands. What do you think's going on beneath the surface? What's driving the creator to put this out there?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that we're talking about an online persona. This is a crafted image,
Right.
maybe even a mask that the creator wears online.
Yeah.
It gives them a certain anonymity, freedom to play with different identities,
Yeah.
maybe even express desires or emotions that they wouldn't be comfortable with in their everyday life.
It's like they can become someone else completely online.
Exactly. And in a world where everyone's fighting for attention,
Right.
where going viral is the goal, there's pressure to create something shocking, something shareable, something that's going to cut through the noise. It's the influence of the internet and meme culture, this constant need to outdo each other, to push the boundaries further and further.
And that ties into some bigger societal problems too, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Economic inequality,
Yeah.
social alienation,
Yeah.
the constant violence in the media.
Yeah. It all feeds into it.
All these factors are part of the environment where this content comes from.
It's this complex mix of individual psychology, online dynamics, and those societal pressures.
Right.
This Dracula Flow persona isn't just a character, it's a reflection of the world we live in.
But even with all the aggression and bragging, there are moments where the mask slips and we see something more vulnerable.
Those are really interesting. They suggest there's more to this persona than we see at first glance.
For instance, there's a line that says, "I don't know who I am anymore. I'm getting too much money. Can you remind me who I am?"
Wow.
It's like a cry for help hidden in all the boasting.
That line's so powerful because it suggests that even behind this carefully constructed persona, there's a real person dealing with real emotions and questions about their identity. This theme of identity keeps coming up. It makes you wonder if the creator is using this persona to explore anxieties and insecurities that they can't face in their offline life.
And there are these hints of wanting connection, love, maybe even redemption.
It's almost like they're using this extreme persona to work through something deeper, something they might not even understand themselves.
So how do we make sense of these contradictions? This mix of aggression and vulnerability, nihilism, and wanting something more.
Well, this is where I think the concept of the shadow self comes in.
Okay.
It's this psychological idea that we all have this darker side, a part of ourselves with our repressed emotions, fears, and desires.
So you're saying this Dracula flow persona could be a way for the creator to explore those darker parts of themselves.
Exactly. It's like they're externalizing these inner conflicts, giving a voice to the parts of themselves they might not want to admit to.
Right.
It could be cathartic, a way to deal with trauma, or even a cry for help. It's tough to say for sure without knowing more about the creator and their motivations.
It really makes you wonder what they're trying to say. Is it a performance, satire, a reflection of their life, or all of those things?
That's the beauty and challenge of art, especially online. The line between performance and reality is blurry.
Right.
And it's up to us as the audience to engage with the content and figure out what it means.
It's definitely a lot to think about, but I think we've got a good starting point. Why don't we look at some specific examples from the lyrics and see if we can break them down together?
Sounds good to me. I think getting into the specifics will really help us untangle some of that stuff we were just talking about.
Yeah, okay, so one thing that really jumped out at me reading these lyrics was the repetition of this phrase, "This ain't nothing to me, man." It comes up all the time, almost like a mantra.
It's really interesting how that phrase works in the lyrics, you know? On the one hand, it reinforces that tough guy image, like nothing can touch them.
Right.
But it also makes you wonder if it's like a defense mechanism, a way of pushing away the emotional weight of what they're describing.
Like they're trying to convince themselves as much as us.
Exactly. It's like they're building up this wall of being untouchable by repeating it.
Yeah.
Almost trying to numb themselves to the pain or the guilt underneath.
Which goes back to that whole nihilistic thing we were talking about.
Right.
If nothing matters, then there are no consequences.
It's a pretty bleak outlook, especially with all the graphic violence and drug use that's all over these lyrics.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what kind of worldview the creator has and what experiences might have led them there.
And then when you think you've got them figured out, there's this vulnerability that pops up.
Yeah.
There's one line that says, "I don't even trust myself.
Sure.
I don't know who I am anymore. I'm getting too much money ass, so fat. I'm peeking off this Danny Phantom slime. Can you remind me who I am?" It's like this total shift in tone, almost a plea for help.
That's a really powerful line. It brings up themes of identity, the corrupting power of money, even like paranoia and dissociation.
Right.
It's like they're lost in this world they've built up, surrounded by material things, but still empty inside.
And the reference to Danny Phantom, this cartoon ghost, it just adds another layer. It's almost childlike, you know, this longing for someone to remind them who they are, bring them back to reality.
It's a great example of how even in the most extreme or superficial content, there can be these moments of honesty that point to a deeper struggle.
Another thing that keeps coming up is the specific drugs, especially painkillers. There's this line, "Popped a perk 30, got straight to that deuce, smoking funnel-laced cereal milk. I see God. This ain't nothing to me, man. That got me screaming, crying, pissing, shooting ropes."
Wow.
It's almost clinical, the level of detail.
Yeah.
And it paints a pretty disturbing picture.
It's not just about getting high, it's about the ritual, the specific drugs, the effect they want. And the way they describe it, it's like they're looking for oblivion, but at the same time documenting their own downfall.
It's a weird mix of being fascinated and disgusted. Makes you think of what role drugs play in their life, their creative process, even their identity.
It's a question we can't really answer, but it's worth thinking about how substance use might be connected to the other stuff we've been talking about, like searching for identity, wanting to escape, or numbing painful emotions.
We also see this interest in the occult and supernatural, with all the mentions of Dracula demons, rituals. It adds this creepy layer to the whole thing.
The occult has always been intriguing, right? It represents this idea of tapping into something bigger than us wanting to go beyond human limitations.
But it can also be a way of facing our fears, our anxieties about the unknown.
Exactly. And with these lyrics, The occult stuff could be interpreted a few ways. It could be there to make it more shocking, to build up this dark, mysterious image. But it could also be a way for them to explore the darker parts of human nature, the urges and desires we try to hide.
And then there's the violence, which is everywhere in these lyrics and often super graphic. It's hard to know what to make of it sometimes.
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge the impact of violent imagery, especially in music, which can evoke such strong feelings. On the one hand, the violence here could reflect a harsh reality, a world where you have to be ruthless to survive.
Like a defense mechanism to protect yourself in a dangerous place.
Right. But we also have to be aware of how this kind of imagery can desensitize us. When violence is always presented as entertainment, it can become normal, making it easier to accept or even support in real life.
There's a line that stuck with me. Tied the ops to the back of a Trackhawk and dragged them around the block for 24 hours. Looked like a Resident Evil 5 campaign extra after we was done with them. Ops wanted some initiative, blew up their entire quadrant. It's so over the top, but it makes you think about how violence is shown in video games and movies and how that might be affecting how we see the world.
That's so important. We're surrounded by violent images, and it's hard to avoid their influence.
Yeah.
We need to have these conversations and think critically about how media might be shaping our understanding of violence, aggression, even empathy.
But even with all this darkness and violence, there are moments where the creator seems to realize the consequences of their actions. They say, the last guy who ran off on the pack got choked out by some Juoni gloves. The last thing he ever saw was the price tag on them slowly faded into darkness, and I let the archangels take him. It's almost like they feel remorse, like they're wrestling with what they've done.
That's what makes this content so captivating, so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It's not just mindless glorification of violence. There's this moral gray area, this struggle between good and bad, that I think a lot of people can relate to, even if they wouldn't say it out loud.
It reminds us that even the toughest shell can hide a lot of inner turmoil.
It makes you wonder if this Dracula Flow character is a way for the creator to explore their own dark side, to confront the parts of themselves they might not be proud of.
So we've got all these contradictions, violence and vulnerability, nihilism and wanting connection, fascinates with the occult and these hints of spiritual awareness. It's a lot to process.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes doing a deep dive like this so rewarding. It pushes us to look beyond the surface, to wrestle with the complexities of human nature, and to see that even in the darkest corners of the internet, there are stories worth hearing.
We've covered a lot, and I'm sure you're thinking about all this just like I am.
Yeah.
Let's take a minute to gather our thoughts, and then we'll come back and wrap things up, try to make sense of what we've learned. All right, so we're back, and wow, diving into Dracula Flow has been it's been a trip. This weird mix of dark stuff, humor, and like unsettling honesty.
Yeah, one thing that really stands out to me is how this content kind of blurs the line between performance and reality.
Right.
You know, it makes you wonder what's real and what's an act.
There was this one line that really got me. They thought it was Stephen Wallace.
Oh, I
He's
don't
talking about that real life tragedy, the shooting of that unarmed black teenager.
Yeah.
To just drop that into the song with all the bragging and violence, it's jarring.
It really makes you think about what they're trying to do, right? Is it to provoke? Is there some deeper meaning about police brutality? Or is it just shock value? Tough to say for sure.
And I think that ambiguity is part of what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
It makes you face these uncomfortable questions and come up with your own interpretation.
It's like it reflects back on the listener.
Yeah.
A kind of Rorschach test for the internet age.
Okay, so we've broken down the themes, analyzed the lyrics, talked about the context. What does it all mean? What are the big takeaways from this deep dive into Dracula Flow?
I think the biggest one for me is that online content, even the most extreme or weird stuff, can give us a glimpse into someone's mind and even reflect bigger trends in society.
Like holding up a mirror to our culture, even if it's a distorted one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it might be easy to just dismiss this as shock value or entertainment, but I think there's a real chance to engage with it on a deeper level, to ask tough questions and try to understand what it says about the world.
It also shows the two sides of being anonymous online. On one hand, it allows for amazing creativity and self-expression that you might not get offline.
Sure.
But it can also create a space where extreme personalities and harmful content can flourish.
It becomes really hard to separate the performance from the person to know what's real and what's made up.
Which is why critical thinking is so important these days.
Absolutely.
We can't just accept everything we see online as truth.
We have to analyze information, check sources, and look at different viewpoints before we form opinions or judge.
So as we wrap up this look at Dracula Flow, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've seen how this persona uses extreme imagery and language to explore ideas of identity, power, and societal collapse. Do you think this kind of content could be a symptom of a deeper unease in our culture? Like a reflection of a world struggling with technology changing so fast, social divisions, and a growing sense of disillusionment?
That's a really interesting question, and I think the answer might be in engaging with these voices instead of silencing them, in trying to understand them, maybe even finding some hope in the darkness.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Dracula Flow. It's been a journey, and I hope it's left you with more questions than answers. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and never stop questioning the world around you.